Happy birthday, Mom. This is your new home, my son, Dashiell Everhart said, dropping my suitcase at the entrance of a private nursing home. The professionals here will take care of you. I stayed silent, clutching my purse, my fingers tightening around the leather strap. His wife, Octavia Drummond, smiled with a perfection that always made me uneasy. None of them realized that this day would mark a mistake they would soon regret. The morning had started like any other, with sunlight streaming through the blinds and dust motes dancing lazily in the air. I had celebrated birthdays alone for years since my husband passed, savoring quiet mornings with a cup of tea and the soft hum of the city outside. My joints ached, reminding me of decades gone, yet my mind remained sharp, alert to every detail. As Dashiell and Octavia guided me through the gates, the sterile smell of disinfectant and polished floors hit me. The lobby was too bright, too clean, too cheerful. Their smiles and casual chatter grated against my nerves, but I held my head high. They had assumed I was frail and compliant, but they were about to learn otherwise. The receptionist greeted us warmly, oblivious to the tension in the room. Dashiell handed over paperwork without a word, brushing past me like I was just an accessory to his day. Octavia's high-heeled shoes clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing in a rhythm that mocked me. I reminded myself to breathe, to observe, to plan. Entering the director's office, I noticed Magnus Kettering's startled expression. He rose instantly, sensing something unusual, something I intended to exploit. Dashiell sank into a chair, smug and unaware, believing this was a simple transaction, a quick birthday gesture. I studied him quietly, every twitch of his face, every subtle movement, storing it for later. Octavia leaned against the wall, radiating confidence. I smiled faintly, not with pleasure, but with patience. They thought control lay in their hands, but I had decades of wisdom, subtle cunning, and the quiet power of experience on my side. The calm before the storm, I realized, was mine to command. I let a pause stretch, watching Dashiell fidget under the silence. His arrogance would crack under pressure. Octavia's perfection would falter. Patience, observation, and strategy were my allies. Their error was colossal, but their downfall would be exquisite in its revelation. Every detail of the office, the polished wood, the faint smell of cologne, the neutral chairs, became part of my plan. I memorized everything, knowing it might serve as leverage later. Even Magnus' discomfort added an invisible weight to the room, emphasizing their misjudgment. For a moment, I closed my eyes, recalling birthday gifts, scraped knees, and the childhood laughter of the boy who once loved me. Nostalgia stirred briefly, then subsided. Sentimentality had no place in the work ahead. Today, clarity and patience mattered more than emotion. Finally, I opened my eyes, letting my gaze linger on Dashiell. His smugness, his assumption that he could decide my fate, ignited a controlled fire within me. They had underestimated me. Today marked the beginning of their reckoning. After leaving the director's office, I was escorted to my room, carrying my purse tightly against me. The walls were bland, the floors polished, everything arranged for efficiency and comfort, but devoid of warmth. I examined the space carefully, imagining it as a stage, a chessboard for the quiet game I was about to play. Dashiell and Octavia lingered in the doorway, exchanging glances that betrayed unease. I gave them nothing, no acknowledgement, no gratitude, no submission. Silence amplified my presence, a subtle but powerful reminder that I was in control of my own mind and reactions. Their discomfort was satisfying. I unpacked my small suitcase slowly, placing my favorite scarf and a few personal trinkets carefully on the nightstand. The worn edges of a photo frame reminded me of the years I had given to them, the sacrifices, the love, the guidance. I let the memories fuel a quiet resolve. As I walked the hallways, I noted routines, the faces of the residents, the staff's patterns. Everything became data, observations to be stored and analyzed. I would need it all, each small detail, for the inevitable confrontation. Every glance, every word would matter. During lunch, I positioned myself at a small table near the window, watching sunlight spill across the floor. Dashiell and Octavia entered, faces bright but strained, attempting charm. I offered polite smiles to others while keeping my focus on them. Their tension was visible, yet they didn't know why. The garden visit that afternoon provided another layer of observation. I noticed Dashiell's impatience with small obstacles, Octavia's irritation at minor inconveniences of the space. These glimpses revealed vulnerabilities they did not intend to display. Patience, I realized, would magnify their mistakes. Back in my room, I placed a cup of tea on the table and reflected on the day so far. Small victories had already begun, doubt creeping into their confident expressions, minor errors surfacing, their composure subtly fraying. Observation was the first step to their undoing. I spent the evening arranging my personal items strategically, as though laying pieces on a chessboard. Each object, each memory, was a silent testament to my agency. I was reminding myself, and eventually them, that age was not weakness. Influence and strategy were tools honed over decades. Night fell, quiet and deep. I lay in bed, listening to distant sounds, imagining the moments to come. Every plan, every observation, every patient pause built toward a crescendo. My mind worked relentlessly, fueled by clarity and righteous indignation. As I drifted toward sleep, I felt the calm thrill of control. Dashiell and Octavia had made a grave error, and I intended to ensure they understood it fully. The stage was set, and the opening act was complete. Morning arrived, streaming sunlight across the beige walls of my room. I dressed carefully, putting on my favorite shawl, a simple piece that carried memories and comfort. Today, I reminded myself, was about observation, patience, and strategy. Every action counted. Breakfast was quiet, with the hum of soft conversation around me. I smiled politely at other residents, noting their interactions, the subtleties of their gestures, the alliances formed through small talk. These would be useful indirectly as my plan unfolded. Dashiell appeared first in the hallway, his casual swagger attempting confidence. I held my gaze calm, letting him feel the subtle power of my presence. Octavia followed, her high heels announcing her pride, yet already a trace of unease shadowing her posture. I let silence speak louder than words. During a brief encounter, I commented lightly on the room's decor, measuring their reactions. Each twitch of an eyebrow, each shift in posture confirmed that their control was fraying, slowly but perceptibly. Patience, observation, subtle influence, these were my weapons. Lunch brought the first informal interactions. I chose my seating with care, positioning myself near sympathetic residents and planting small, casual remarks that would quietly ripple through the environment. The undercurrent of change was invisible but effective. In the garden that afternoon, I observed Dashiell's struggle with minor frustrations, a path blocked, a misplaced item. Octavia's frustration flared at trivial inconveniences. I smiled inwardly. Life, like this place, exposes arrogance when patience is exercised. Returning to my room, I cataloged every detail mentally: body language, tone, expressions, small victories. Each observation became a building block in the strategy one was quietly executing. They were unaware that the balance of power had already shifted. Evening settled over the facility. I lay in bed, thinking of the years, the sacrifices, the love poured into their lives. Each memory fueled not resentment, but purpose. They had assumed weakness. I would demonstrate strength. The night stretched ahead, still and quiet. I listened, planned, imagined. Every misstep they made would now be a lesson, carefully orchestrated, executed with precision. Sleep came finally, light and restless, filled with strategies and the faint thrill of anticipation. I welcomed the coming day. My patience and preparation were nearing fruition. Sunlight spilled across my room, waking me gently. Today would continue the unfolding of the lesson they could not yet perceive. Dashiell had no idea how subtle and precise I could be, how strategic a mother's mind can remain. Breakfast was subdued. I exchanged light conversation with other residents, gauging moods, planting seeds of observation. Every nod, every smile, every comment had purpose, subtly shaping perceptions around me. Dashiell and Octavia arrived later, smiling, attempting charm. I responded minimally, letting my calm unsettle them. They had believed their plan was unshakable, yet the cracks in their confidence were already showing. As we walked the hallways, I observed every micro expression, every minor error, every subtle sign of frustration. Patience and timing would amplify each one, and I took quiet satisfaction in the unfolding imbalance. Lunch provided more opportunities. Strategic seating, casual remarks, and subtle reminders of social dynamics amplified the effects of my quiet influence. By mid-afternoon, small but cumulative shifts were evident. In the garden, Dashiell's impatience with trivial tasks and Octavia's irritation at minor obstacles gave me more data. Each observation built toward the critical moment when they would realize their mistake. Back in my room, I reflected on the subtle victories of the day. Their arrogance and confidence had begun to falter, yet they remained blissfully unaware. Patience and quiet strategy were doing their work. Evening approached. I arranged my belongings with care, mentally rehearsing the next phase of my plan. Each item, each memory, each gesture would contribute to the eventual revelation. Night settled quietly. I lay in bed, envisioning the coming confrontation, knowing every calculated observation and patient maneuver would culminate in their realization of the truth. By midnight, I felt calm, confident, and in control. Their misjudgment was monumental, and the time to expose it was drawing near. The next morning, sunlight streamed across my room, soft and golden. I dressed in my favorite cardigan, feeling the familiar comfort of its worn fabric. Today would be about subtle influence, planting seeds that would grow without anyone noticing. Every step I took was deliberate, every glance measured. Breakfast was quiet. I smiled politely at the other residents, listening to their conversations, noting which voices carried authority and which were easily swayed. Each observation added another piece to the puzzle. I was preparing the groundwork, knowing the lesson for Dashiell and Octavia was coming. Dashiell arrived mid-morning, attempting to exude confidence. I held my gaze, unflinching, letting the calm in my posture unsettle him. Octavia followed, flawless as ever, but her smile seemed a little strained. I let the silence between us speak louder than any words could. As we walked the hallways, I casually commented on small details, a crooked picture frame, a slightly dusty shelf. Each minor remark drew their attention, revealing cracks in their composure. Arrogance, I thought, always falters under scrutiny. Lunch brought another chance to observe. I chose a seat near two residents who had been quietly critical of newcomers. Their reactions to my presence and remarks were subtle, but they would later amplify the effect on Dashiell and Octavia. Influence is often invisible, yet profound. In the garden, Dashiell grew restless over a small obstacle, a bird feeder that blocked his path. Octavia sighed at a misplaced bench. Their small frustrations were golden opportunities. Life, I realized, often exposes arrogance if one watches closely. Back in my room, I reviewed the day in my mind. Each observation, each minor victory, built toward the eventual revelation. Patience and subtlety were far more powerful than confrontation. They had assumed compliance. I would show them control. Evening came, and I arranged my belongings methodically. Each photograph, book, and trinket served as a silent reminder of my agency, a message they could not yet decipher. Strength, I thought, is often quiet. Night fell. I lay in bed, listening to the soft hum of the facility. Every small misstep by Dashiell and Octavia was being catalogued, every twitch, every sigh noted. They would not see the consequences coming until it was too late. Sleep arrived briefly, punctuated by the thrill of anticipation. The pieces were falling into place. Tomorrow would bring the next chapter in their unawareness, a lesson in humility and patience. Sunlight filled my room, gentle but insistent, waking me with a sense of purpose. Today would be about subtle manipulations and mental positioning. Dashiell had no idea of the depth of observation I had undertaken. Octavia would falter, and I would be ready. Breakfast was calm, yet my eyes scanned every corner of the dining hall. Residents' murmurs, staff movements, and minor gestures were all data. Influence is like water. It seeps into every crack until it shapes the whole structure. Dashiell and Octavia arrived, attempting charm as always. I responded minimally, letting my calm unsettle them. Their confidence, built on assumed dominance, was already showing cracks. The quiet power of experience, patience, and observation outweighed their arrogance. As we walked the hallways, I let small remarks and observations pass. A crooked vase, a fading painting, a faint odor, each was a test. Their reactions were subtle but telling, small indicators of the larger imbalance forming. Lunch provided another opportunity. I chose a table carefully, seated near residents whose opinions carried weight. A few casual comments, a faint smile here or there, and the ripple of perception began spreading. They were unaware they were losing control. During the afternoon, I watched Dashiell fidget at every minor inconvenience, while Octavia's perfect composure wavered at small annoyances. Patience, observation, and subtle influence were the weapons of choice. Their arrogance was unraveling quietly. Back in my room, I reviewed my observations. Each small misstep, each twitch of frustration, each shift in demeanor built a pattern. Tomorrow, the plan would enter a more decisive phase. I had to be precise. Evening approached. I placed a few personal items strategically, using their positioning to reinforce subtle messages of control. Each object, each photograph, each token of memory was a statement they could not yet read. Night settled. I lay awake, visualizing the coming confrontation. Every word, every gesture, every subtle manipulation was stored for the moment of revelation. They would not see it coming. Sleep came lightly, with fleeting dreams of past birthdays and small victories. Tomorrow would bring the next move, the next test, the next step in a patient and quiet plan. Morning sunlight spilled into my room, and I rose deliberately, every movement intentional. Today would build on the lessons planted yesterday. Dashiell and Octavia had no idea that their misjudgment had already begun to unravel. Breakfast was subdued. I engaged in light conversation with residents, noting their moods, observing allegiances, and subtly influencing opinions. Even small smiles and nods carried weight in shaping perception. Dashiell and Octavia arrived mid-morning, still attempting charm. I let my gaze linger, calm, composed, and unshakable. The tension between us was growing, invisible to them, but palpable to anyone paying attention. As we walked the hallways, I commented lightly on small details, each observation, each remark a subtle test. Dashiell's impatience and Octavia's irritation were quietly magnified by my deliberate calm. Arrogance, I reflected, is brittle under scrutiny. Lunch allowed further strategic placement. I sat near residents who influenced social perception, offering subtle hints, quiet smiles, and remarks that would later shift Dashiell and Octavia's awareness. Influence is most effective when invisible. During a garden walk, Dashiell fumed at trivial inconveniences, while Octavia's perfectionist facade faltered slightly. Each moment was a small victory, unnoticed yet potent. Patience and subtle observation were shaping their downfall. Back in my room, I cataloged the day's events mentally. Each minor misstep and reaction would be critical later. I was setting the stage for the revelation, ensuring that when it came, it would be undeniable. Evening approached. I arranged my belongings carefully, as if placing pieces on a chessboard. Each object, memory, and token was a reminder that age and experience are not weaknesses. Control lies in quiet knowledge. Night fell. I lay in bed, listening to the facility settle, imagining the impact of the subtle seeds I had planted. Their unawareness was their greatest vulnerability. Sleep arrived, shallow but filled with anticipation. The next day promised more opportunities for observation, influence, and the slow building of a decisive revelation. Sunlight streamed into my room, a gentle herald of the day ahead. Every movement I made was deliberate, every glance measured. Today would be another step in the subtle orchestration of events, an invisible lesson in humility and patience. Breakfast was calm. I engaged briefly with residents, observing reactions, noting alliances, and quietly reinforcing my influence. Small gestures, soft smiles, and polite words were tools in the ongoing plan. Dashiell and Octavia arrived, their confidence intact, but beginning to show cracks. I responded minimally, letting the quiet strength of presence unsettle them. They assumed control, unaware they were losing it. Walking through the hallways, I made light observations, comments, and gestures. Each one magnified the subtle unraveling of their arrogance. Every twitch, every glance, every sigh became part of the pattern I was creating. Lunch provided opportunities for subtle maneuvers. I positioned myself near residents with influence, making casual remarks and showing calm authority. Their perception of me shifted quietly, but surely. In the garden, Dashiell grew restless over minor frustrations, Octavia over small irritations. I smiled inwardly. Life has a way of revealing arrogance to those who underestimate patience, and I was merely facilitating it. Back in my room, I reflected on the subtle victories of the day. Their composure was fraying, though neither noticed. Each observation, each remark, each smile built toward a climax. Evening approached, and I organized my belongings strategically, reinforcing my quiet influence and readiness. Every object and memory carried weight in the subtle narrative unfolding. Night fell. I lay awake, imagining how the carefully laid plans would impact them. Patience, observation, and quiet authority were already changing the balance of power. By midnight, I felt calm, confident, and in control. The next phase of revelation was imminent, and their underestimation of me would soon become their greatest regret. Morning light spilled across my room, and I rose deliberately, feeling the familiar weight of purpose. Each movement, each breath, each glance today would be a step in my quiet orchestration. Dashiell and Octavia were unaware of the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. Breakfast was calm, yet my eyes scanned the room meticulously. I noted the residents' moods, subtle exchanges, and minor gestures. Every observation added a new layer to the invisible influence I was cultivating. Patience, I reminded myself, was the most powerful weapon. Dashiell entered with a confident stride, attempting to project control. I held my gaze, unflinching, letting the calm and quiet authority in my demeanor unsettle him. Octavia followed, perfection seemingly intact, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. I smiled faintly, inwardly savoring the tension. As we walked through the hallways, I commented casually on small details, a slightly off painting, a minor dust on a shelf. Each remark drew attention and subtly amplified cracks in their composure. Arrogance, I thought, is fragile when observed patiently. Lunch offered another subtle battlefield. I positioned myself near influential residents, exchanged quiet nods, and let small comments ripple through the social web. Their reactions would later magnify Dashiell and Octavia's growing uncertainty. In the garden, Dashiell's impatience grew over trivial inconveniences while Octavia's composure faltered at minor obstacles. Each reaction was a small victory, evidence of the unraveling arrogance I had anticipated. Patience was silently winning. Back in my room, I cataloged every detail, every twitch, every sigh. These small observations would serve as ammunition for the eventual revelation. Each moment was a step closer to the moment when their misjudgment would be exposed. Evening arrived. I carefully placed my belongings, each photograph and keepsake a silent reminder of my experience, wisdom, and quiet power. Age is not weakness. Control is subtle and deliberate. Night fell, quiet and contemplative. I lay awake, planning the next steps, anticipating the small cracks that would widen into undeniable lessons. The pieces were aligning perfectly. Sleep came lightly, filled with fleeting visions of subtle triumphs. Tomorrow promised more opportunities for observation and influence, building toward the moment when they would fully grasp their mistake. Sunlight poured through the blinds, waking me gently. I dressed with intention, letting the fabric of my cardigan remind me of comfort and strategy. Today's focus was observation, influence, and the quiet gathering of small victories. Breakfast was subdued. I engaged residents with soft smiles and light conversation, noting subtle gestures, alliances, and reactions. Even minor interactions carried significance in the invisible narrative I was constructing. Dashiell arrived with a practiced confidence, which I met with calm, unwavering observation. Octavia followed, her perfection intact, yet tension lurked beneath the surface. The contrast between their assumption of control and the quiet authority I projected was palpable. As we moved through the hallways, I offered small, casual comments about the environment. Each remark highlighted minor imperfections, subtly magnifying their growing frustration. Arrogance falters when observed keenly. Lunch allowed strategic positioning. I sat near socially influential residents, casually interacting and planting subtle cues. These interactions would echo, affecting Dashiell and Octavia in ways they could not yet perceive. During the garden walk, Dashiell became restless over trivial issues, and Octavia's flawless composure faltered at minor inconveniences. Patience and observation were reshaping their confidence, quietly eroding their assumed dominance. Returning to my room, I reflected on the day's subtle victories. Each minor reaction, each twitch, each sigh built toward the ultimate revelation. They were unaware that control had already begun shifting. Evening approached. I arranged my belongings meticulously, reinforcing silent authority. Every photograph, trinket, and memory carried a message they were too blind to perceive. Strength is often quiet, invisible, and enduring. Night fell. I lay awake, imagining how the carefully orchestrated observations would culminate. Dashiell and Octavia had no idea of the subtle unraveling of their arrogance. Sleep arrived shallowly, punctuated by anticipation. Tomorrow would bring the next phase, where the patient groundwork laid over days would produce undeniable consequences. Sunlight entered my room with gentle insistence. I rose deliberately, mindful of every movement. Today, patience and observation would continue to guide the unfolding plan. Dashiell and Octavia had no inkling that their arrogance was quietly collapsing. Breakfast was calm, yet I observed everything. The staff's behavior, residents' interactions, small gestures of alliance. Each detail added to my strategy. Influence is subtle. The slightest ripple can transform perception over time. Dashiell entered confidently, projecting authority, while Octavia's flawless appearance barely concealed her tension. I let my calm presence speak volumes, letting silence unsettle them. Arrogance is brittle. Observation exposes it. In the hallways, I made subtle comments and observations. Minor imperfections unnoticed by most were highlighted by my deliberate attention. Dashiell's irritation and Octavia's subtle frustration were small victories in the invisible game unfolding. Lunch offered a strategic opportunity. I positioned myself near influential residents, made casual remarks, and let small social cues spread subtly. They were unaware that perception was being shaped around them. In the garden, Dashiell's impatience over trivial obstacles and Octavia's mounting irritation provided further evidence of their fragile composure. Observation and subtle influence were quietly winning the day. Back in my room, I cataloged the events mentally. Each micro-expression, each sigh, each twitch was a note in the symphony of their eventual reckoning. Every small detail mattered. Evening approached. I arranged my belongings carefully, each item a silent testament to experience, agency, and patience. They had assumed compliance. I was proving otherwise. Night fell. I lay awake, listening to distant sounds and reflecting on subtle triumphs. Tomorrow promised more observations, more opportunities, and a slow, undeniable shift of power. Sleep arrived lightly, tinged with the thrill of anticipation. The stage was nearly set. The final movements toward revelation were approaching. The morning light was soft, warm, and insistent. I rose carefully, letting every movement remind me of my control. Today would be another step in the quiet orchestration of lessons for Dashiell and Octavia. Breakfast was subdued, yet I observed everything. Small gestures, minor exchanges, and resident interactions were all cataloged. Each interaction added depth to the subtle influence I was building. Dashiell arrived, projecting confidence as always. I met his gaze calmly, letting the quiet authority in my presence unsettle him. Octavia followed, her perfection intact, yet tension lurked beneath her composed exterior. As we moved through the hallways, I made small comments about minor details, subtly highlighting imperfections. Every reaction from Dashiell and Octavia was a quiet victory, a sign of their crumbling arrogance. Lunch offered another chance for subtle influence. I positioned myself near residents whose opinions carried weight, planting casual remarks and small gestures that would ripple through perception, reaching Dashiell and Octavia indirectly. In the garden, Dashiell's impatience over trivial issues and Octavia's irritation at minor obstacles provided valuable insights. Patience and quiet observation were steadily reshaping the balance of power. Back in my room, I reflected on the day's observations. Each subtle reaction, every micro-expression, and each minor error contributed to the invisible pattern of control I was establishing. Evening approached. I arranged my belongings methodically, reinforcing subtle messages of authority and presence. Each object, memory, and trinket strengthened the narrative I was constructing quietly around them. Night fell. I lay awake, imagining the impact of the subtle groundwork laid over the past days. They were unaware that their arrogance was unraveling slowly but inexorably. Sleep came briefly, shallow but filled with anticipation. The coming days would bring more opportunities, more subtle victories, and the eventual revelation that would leave them stunned. Sunlight crept across my room, gentle and deliberate, as if marking the passage of time and opportunity. I rose carefully, letting every movement remind me of purpose and strategy. Today, observation and subtle influence would continue to shape the unfolding lesson. Breakfast was calm, yet my eyes scanned every detail. Residents' expressions, staff gestures, and fleeting interactions were all recorded mentally. Influence is often invisible, yet its effects resonate widely. Each smile or nod became part of a quiet ripple. Dashiell appeared mid-morning, his confidence intact but slightly more cautious. Octavia followed, flawless but with subtle tension in her posture. I let silence speak louder than words, letting the calm authority of my presence unsettle them both. Walking the hallways, I commented lightly on small details, drawing attention to minor imperfections. Each remark, though seemingly trivial, subtly magnified cracks in their composure. Arrogance, I reflected, is brittle under scrutiny and patience. Lunch offered strategic opportunities. I positioned myself near influential residents, exchanged quiet smiles and remarks, and let subtle social cues ripple, indirectly affecting Dashiell and Octavia. Their reactions were carefully noted. In the garden, Dashiell grew impatient over trivial matters, while Octavia's meticulous facade cracked slightly. These small, unnoticed victories built momentum. Patience, observation, and subtle influence were quietly gaining control. Back in my room, I cataloged the day's events. Every twitch, sigh, and micro-expression was a piece of the larger puzzle. Their arrogance and assumed dominance were steadily being challenged by subtle, calculated observation. Evening came, and I arranged my belongings with precision. Each photograph, keepsake, and object reinforced silent authority, a quiet assertion of presence and influence. Age, I reminded myself, is wisdom, not weakness. Night fell. I lay awake, considering the cumulative impact of the past days. The subtle cracks in their confidence would soon widen, and the revelation would be unavoidable. Sleep arrived lightly, filled with anticipation and calm satisfaction. The stage for their reckoning was almost set. Morning light streamed through the blinds, warm and insistent. I rose deliberately, aware that every action today could influence the subtle shifts I had been cultivating. Dashiell and Octavia remained blissfully unaware of the momentum quietly building against them. Breakfast was subdued. I engaged residents with quiet smiles and gentle conversation, noting reactions, alliances, and fleeting expressions. Each interaction, though seemingly minor, carried significance, shaping perception invisibly. Dashiell entered confidently, attempting dominance, while Octavia followed, flawless yet slightly tense. I let calm authority and measured silence do the work, unsettling them without confrontation. Observation was the true power today. As we walked through the hallways, I made subtle remarks and gestures about small imperfections. Each minor comment amplified cracks in their composure. Arrogance falters under patient, attentive scrutiny. Lunch offered further opportunities for influence. I sat near residents with social authority, casually interacting and planting quiet cues that would ripple toward Dashiell and Octavia. Their subtle reactions were carefully noted. In the garden, Dashiell's impatience over trivial issues and Octavia's irritation at minor inconveniences became more evident. Each small victory reinforced the slow erosion of their assumed control. Patience and quiet observation were shaping the balance. Returning to my room, I reflected on the day's subtle triumphs. Each micro-expression, sigh, and twitch contributed to the silent narrative unfolding. Their arrogance was being steadily undermined without their knowledge. Evening approached. I arranged my belongings with care, reinforcing subtle messages of authority and calm presence. Each object, memory, and token carried weight they could not yet perceive. Night fell. I lay awake, contemplating the invisible influence I had woven around them. Their misjudgment had created the perfect conditions for eventual revelation. Sleep came lightly, anticipation simmering beneath the calm. Tomorrow promised more subtle victories, more strategic observations, and further preparation for their eventual reckoning. Sunlight spilled across my room, soft yet persistent. I rose with deliberate care, mindful of every movement. Today's focus would be the continuation of observation, subtle influence, and the careful accumulation of small advantages. Breakfast was quiet. I scanned the room, noting every glance, whisper, and gesture among residents. Each small interaction, though seemingly trivial, added layers to the invisible shift in dynamics I was orchestrating. Dashiell appeared confidently, though I sensed an underlying caution. Octavia followed, her composure still flawless but slightly strained. I let silence speak volumes, my calm presence unsettling them both without a word. Walking the hallways, I made light observations and subtle comments. Each remark highlighted minor imperfections, magnifying small cracks in their composure. Arrogance falters when carefully watched. Lunch provided opportunities for subtle strategy. I positioned myself near residents with influence, offered quiet smiles, and dropped casual remarks that rippled outward, indirectly impacting Dashiell and Octavia. Their reactions were carefully catalogued. In the garden, Dashiell's impatience and Octavia's irritation continued to show. Each small misstep reinforced my patient strategy. Observation and subtle influence quietly reshaped the balance of power. Back in my room, I cataloged each minor reaction mentally. Every twitch, sigh, and glance added to the larger plan. Their assumed dominance was quietly being challenged, unnoticed. Evening came. I arranged my belongings meticulously, reinforcing subtle authority. Photographs, trinkets, and keepsakes each played a role in the silent narrative unfolding around them. Night fell. I lay awake, considering the cumulative effect of days of observation and patient influence. The final act, when it came, would leave them stunned. Sleep came shallowly, punctuated by quiet anticipation. The next day promised more subtle victories and further preparation for the ultimate revelation. Morning light entered the room, golden and insistent. I rose deliberately, aware of the significance of every action today. Observation, subtle influence, and quiet patience would continue shaping the course of events. Breakfast was calm. I engaged residents with gentle conversation and small smiles, noting fleeting expressions, alliances, and reactions. Each interaction, no matter how minor, contributed to the growing momentum of my plan. Dashiell arrived, attempting confidence, while Octavia followed, flawless but tense beneath the surface. I allowed my calm, measured presence to unsettle them subtly, reinforcing the quiet imbalance I had been cultivating. As we moved through the hallways, I made casual comments about minor imperfections and small details. Each remark subtly magnified the cracks in their composure, revealing arrogance for what it truly was, fragile. Lunch offered further subtle maneuvering. I positioned myself near socially influential residents, made light remarks, and let quiet cues ripple outward. Dashiell and Octavia remained unaware that perception was already shifting against them. In the garden, Dashiell's impatience and Octavia's irritation surfaced again. Each small misstep was a victory, evidence that subtle observation and patient influence were effective. The tide of control was turning slowly, but surely. Back in my room, I cataloged each observation, each micro-expression, and each minor error. They had assumed compliance, yet control had quietly slipped from their hands without their noticing. Evening approached. I arranged my belongings meticulously, reinforcing quiet authority and presence. Each object, memory, and trinket silently testified to my experience and patience. Night fell. I lay awake, contemplating how the subtle groundwork laid over days would culminate in undeniable consequences for them. Their misjudgment had created the perfect conditions for revelation. Sleep arrived lightly, filled with anticipation. The coming days promised more opportunities, subtle victories, and the inevitable moment when they would fully grasp their mistake. Morning sunlight entered my room, warm and steady. I rose carefully, aware that today would be decisive. Every gesture, every glance, every word would contribute to the culmination of the quiet strategy one had orchestrated over weeks. Breakfast was calm. I exchanged polite smiles with residents, observing their moods, interactions, and reactions. Each subtle cue added depth to the invisible influence I had been cultivating. Dashiell and Octavia remained unaware of the shifting balance. Dashiell arrived mid-morning, projecting confidence, while Octavia followed, seemingly flawless but subtly tense. I let silence speak volumes, allowing my calm presence to unsettle them without confrontation. Arrogance is brittle under careful observation. As we walked the hallways, I made casual remarks, pointing out minor details and imperfections. Each small observation amplified cracks in their composure, preparing them for the revelation to come. Lunch provided another opportunity for subtle manipulation. I sat strategically, near residents whose reactions carried weight, letting quiet gestures and remarks ripple through perception, affecting Dashiell and Octavia indirectly. In the garden, Dashiell's impatience flared at trivial obstacles, and Octavia's irritation surfaced. Each reaction reinforced the slow erosion of their confidence. Patience and observation were quietly winning the day. Back in my room, I cataloged every detail. Every twitch, sigh, glance, and micro-expression was stored in my mind. They had assumed dominance, yet control had subtly shifted away from them. Evening approached. I arranged my belongings with careful precision, silently asserting authority. Each photograph, trinket, and memory carried weight, reinforcing the quiet narrative I had woven. Night fell. I lay awake, contemplating the culmination of days of subtle influence. The stage was almost set, and the final act would soon unfold. Sleep came lightly, tinged with anticipation. The next day would mark the beginning of their reckoning. The next morning, I rose with deliberate care, every movement intentional. Today would be the day when subtle observations and patient influence would become undeniable consequences. Dashiell and Octavia were still blissfully unaware. Breakfast was quiet. I observed every resident, noting minor gestures, expressions, and interactions. These seemingly trivial details had become vital components of the larger plan, rippling outward to affect perception. Dashiell arrived, projecting confidence as always, but his posture betrayed subtle unease. Octavia followed, flawless yet slightly strained. My calm, unflinching presence amplified their discomfort, preparing the way for the inevitable revelation. Walking the hallways, I casually highlighted minor imperfections, magnifying small cracks in their composure. Arrogance, I reflected, is most fragile when observed patiently and strategically. Lunch provided another subtle battlefield. I positioned myself near socially influential residents, making quiet remarks and gestures that rippled through the social fabric, further destabilizing Dashiell and Octavia. In the garden, Dashiell's impatience and Octavia's irritation were more evident than ever. Each small misstep built momentum, reinforcing the invisible shift of control that had quietly taken root. Back in my room, I reviewed the day's subtle victories. Every minor reaction, every micro-expression, every sigh strengthened the framework for the ultimate revelation. Evening approached. I meticulously arranged my belongings, reinforcing silent authority. Each object, each memory, each photograph testified to my agency, patience, and strategic mastery. Night fell. I lay awake, anticipating the final act. Their misunderstanding of my strength and experience had created the perfect conditions for their reckoning. Sleep arrived lightly, tinged with calm anticipation. The next day promised the culmination of weeks of strategy and observation. Sunlight poured into my room. I rose carefully, fully aware that today would bring the culmination of patient planning. Every movement, every glance, every interaction would play its role in the revelation Dashiell and Octavia were about to face. Breakfast was quiet, yet my observations were sharp. I noted residents' reactions, minor interactions, and subtle gestures. Each detail contributed to the invisible shift in perception that had been building steadily. Dashiell arrived, still projecting confidence, but subtle signs of unease flickered across his expression. Octavia followed, flawless yet tense beneath the surface. My calm, measured presence amplified the cracks in their arrogance. Walking through the hallways, I made light remarks and subtle observations, highlighting minor imperfections. Each remark magnified the small fractures in their composure, preparing them for the moment when their misjudgment would become undeniable. Lunch provided a stage for further subtle influence. I positioned myself near residents whose opinions carried weight, planted quiet cues, and let gestures ripple through perception, gradually undermining Dashiell and Octavia's confidence. In the garden, Dashiell's impatience and Octavia's irritation were pronounced. Each micro-misstep became evidence of the gradual erosion of their assumed control. Patience and observation quietly reshaped the dynamics in my favor. Back in my room, I reviewed all observations, storing details of every expression, sigh, and movement. Their arrogance, built on assumed dominance, had already begun to crumble under patient scrutiny. Evening approached. I arranged my belongings strategically, reinforcing authority and silent influence. Each photograph, trinket, and memento was a deliberate reminder that age is wisdom, not weakness. Night fell. I lay awake, anticipating the inevitable revelation. The subtle groundwork of days was about to produce undeniable consequences. Sleep arrived lightly, tinged with anticipation. The next day promised confrontation, clarity, and justice. Morning arrived, golden and decisive. I rose carefully, every movement deliberate, every glance purposeful. Today, Dashiell and Octavia would finally realize the consequences of their arrogance. Breakfast was quiet. I observed residents closely, noting reactions, alliances, and minor expressions. Each detail, collected over weeks, had quietly built the framework for this day. Dashiell entered, confidence slightly faltering. Octavia followed, flawless yet tense. I let silence speak volumes, letting the calm authority of my presence unsettle them. The cracks in their arrogance were now visible. As we walked the hallways, I made casual remarks about minor imperfections. Each observation amplified their unease, finally making the invisible consequences of their actions tangible. Lunch became the stage for subtle but undeniable revelations. I shared quiet observations with influential residents, letting social cues ripple outward. Dashiell and Octavia could no longer ignore the truth. In the garden, I calmly guided them to witness small truths: residents' admiration, staff respect, and the subtle recognition of my agency. Each micro moment revealed their misjudgment. Returning to my room, I finally confronted them. I did not yell, I did not plead. I calmly, with deliberate clarity, outlined every oversight, every misjudgment, and every arrogant assumption they had made. Dashiell's face paled. Octavia's perfect composure shattered. The quiet, patient, and deliberate strategy of weeks had culminated in undeniable reality. They had underestimated me. Evening fell. I smiled faintly, calm and victorious. The lesson was learned. Arrogance and assumed dominance crumble in the presence of patient observation, subtle influence, and quiet wisdom. Night arrived. I lay in bed, satisfied. Justice had been restored, not with force, but with strategy, patience, and quiet authority. Dashiell and Octavia would never forget the day they misjudged me.